I moved into this apartment a little over 3 months ago. It's not much, just a narrow one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building that creaks when the wind changes direction. Rent's decent, neighbors are invisible, and it's quiet, which is all I really wanted. The hallway is what sold me on the place. Long and narrow, with warm amber light fixtures and those worn hardwood floors that still carry the faint scent of varnish and dust. It felt nostalgic somehow. Like something from my grandparents' house. I've always been a night owl, and that's when the place really shines. Late at night, with the lights off and only the glow from the street lamp leaking through the slats of the blinds, there's this peaceful stillness that settles into the bones of the apartment. At least, it used to feel peaceful. The first night it happened, I chalked it up to bad sleep. I'd been up late writing reports for work, the kind of brain-dead busywork that drains your energy without giving anything back. I shut off my laptop around 1:30 a.m., turned off the kitchen light, and was about to head to bed when I noticed something odd down the hallway. There was a shape. Right at the threshold between the hallway and the bedroom. Just standing there. It wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything. Just there. I froze, one hand still on the light switch. My eyes strained in the low light. It didn't make sense. There was nothing in that hallway that could cast a shadow like that. No coat rack, no furniture. Just a bare wall and the door to my bedroom. I squinted. Maybe it was a trick of the shadows. You know how your eyes play games with you when you're tired. The figure wasn't distinct. No facial features, no real detail, just the faint suggestion of a human form. It reminded me of a silhouette you might see when someone stands behind frosted glass. Still, I must have stared for a full minute. I even tilted my head a bit, like that would help it come into focus. It didn't. But nothing moved. And eventually, I shook myself out of it, turned on the hallway light, and it was gone. Of course. Just a shadow. Just a tired brain and poor lighting. I laughed at myself under my breath, walked past the spot a little faster than usual, and got into bed. But when I lay there in the dark, something about that shape kept bugging me. Not the shape itself, really. It was the way it felt familiar. The next day was uneventful. Work, errands, mindless scrolling through my phone. I didn't think much about what happened until I got home that night. I remember hesitating just inside the front door, looking down the hallway again. Empty. Of course it was. The walls were the same pale beige, the wood floor catching just a glint of light from the overhead fixtures. No shadows, no shapes. Just normal. Still, I couldn't help but flip the hallway light on before I took off my shoes. That wasn't like me. I don't like wasting electricity, and I've never been afraid of the dark. But I told myself it was just habit. Just making sure I didn't trip or anything. Around midnight I turned off the living room light and stood at the edge of the kitchen, sipping a glass of water. That's when I saw it again. Same spot. Same shape. Just standing there at the edge of my bedroom doorway. My stomach dropped before I even registered what I was looking at. I didn't move. Just stared. It wasn't exactly clearer than the night before, but something was different. The figure looked slimmer, maybe? The head tilted ever so slightly to one side. Like it was listening. I didn't hear anything though. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. I whispered to myself, "It's just your mind. Just tired." But something else crept in, a thought I didn't like. It wasn't just a figure. It looked like it was trying to be someone. My hand hovered near the light switch. I wanted to turn it on. Wanted to flood the hallway with brightness and prove to myself it was nothing. But a small part of me didn't want to see what might be standing there under full light. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I flicked the switch and stepped forward quickly, pretending I was braver than I felt. Gone. Again. I stood in the hallway, heart racing, palms slick. I even checked behind the bedroom door, inside the closet. Nothing. Still, when I finally got into bed, I didn't turn off the bedside lamp. And I kept glancing toward the hallway like I expected something to appear again. Maybe it was the light, or maybe I was just wired, but I swear. That night, I dreamed about someone I hadn't seen in years. And when I woke up, I couldn't remember their name. I didn't sleep much that night. Tossed and turned, every little creak of the building making my eyes snap open. It felt like something was just on the edge of memory, something important, but I couldn't grab onto it. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was being ridiculous. Lack of sleep does things to your brain. Makes you see patterns where there aren't any, turns coat hangers into lurking intruders. I mean, the brain is a paranoid little machine when it's tired enough. I didn't bring it up to anyone. I work remote, and I don't talk to many people outside of the occasional email or text. But all day, I had this weird hum of tension in my chest. Not full-blown anxiety, just that low, vibrating feeling you get when you know something's wrong but can't explain why. The third night, I stayed up again. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid to sleep. Around 1:15 a.m., I walked into the kitchen to grab some water. Lights off. There it was. Same spot. Same figure. But this time, I could see more. The shape was still shadowy, still vaguely human, but its posture had changed. A little more forward, like it was leaning in ever so slightly. Like it was waiting for something. The head was still tilted, but now I could make out the curve of a cheek, or what should have been a cheek. And that's when it hit me. The face, it wasn't blank anymore. It was wrong, yes, twisted by shadows and distance, but there was something about the cheekbone, the slight indent of the chin. It looked like my brother. Except, my brother's been dead for 9 years. I stood there, glass shaking in my hand. Part of me screamed to flip the light on again, but another part just stood frozen, rooted in place like a scared animal. I kept staring at the figure, willing it to move, to blink, to breathe, anything to prove it was real or fake. But it never did. Eventually, I managed to break the stare and turn on the light. Gone. Just like before. I paced the hallway for 20 minutes after that. Checking every door, every closet, even the locked front door. Nothing out of place. No one there. But when I looked back down the hallway, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. The figure, it always appeared right outside my bedroom. Like it was waiting for me to go in. Or keeping me from coming out. The next morning, I called in sick. Not that anyone really noticed. I mostly work alone, and my boss isn't the kind to check in unless a deadline's missed. I told myself I needed rest, maybe even a doctor's appointment if this kept up. Hallucinating figures in the dark? That's not nothing. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the hallway in broad daylight. It looked completely ordinary. Harmless. The shadows were soft, lazy, drifting in through the blinds. I even stood in the exact spot where the figure had appeared the last few nights. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling. That image of the figure stayed in my head like an afterimage burned into my retinas. And not just the shape, the face. My brother's face. Or at least something close to it. But that's the thing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something was off. It resembled him. Sure. The cheekbones, the mouth, similar. But it was like someone had tried to reconstruct his face from memory, and gotten just a few things wrong. The proportions. The angle of the jaw. The way the skin didn't quite move naturally in the shadows. Like a bad copy. I started to wonder, what if my mind wasn't pulling these images from nowhere? What if it was dredging up something unfinished? Grief I never dealt with? I mean, I never really talked to anyone after he died. Just moved on. I thought I was fine. But maybe I wasn't. Still, that didn't explain the consistency. 3 nights in a row. Same time. Same place. And each time, the figure changed just slightly, like it was evolving. Refining itself. Like it wanted to be recognized. That night, I turned on every light in the apartment. Left them blazing until 2 a.m. Nothing happened. No figure. No sound. No dream. But when I woke up, lights still on, TV still playing some low-volume documentary, I found something that made my skin crawl. On the hallway floor, near my bedroom threshold, was a single muddy footprint. And I live alone. It wasn't a full footprint, not detailed enough to show toes or tread, but it was there. A smudge, right on the polished wood floor. Oval heel, rounded toe, the arc of a step. I stared at it for a long time, crouched down like getting closer would help me unsee it. I even checked the bottom of my own slippers. Clean. Dry. No mud anywhere else in the apartment. No trail. Just the one print, right outside my bedroom door. Right where the figure always stood. I cleaned it up. What else could I do? Scrubbed it until the wood practically shone, then stood there like an idiot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. But that's when I started to really watch. Every night after that, I stayed up later and later. Turned off the lights around 1 a.m., just to see if it would appear. Sometimes it didn't. But when it did, God, it always waited until just after I looked away. I'd turn my head for a second, glance at my phone, rub my eyes, and then it would be there. Always in the same spot. And every time, it looked a little more human. The fourth time I saw it, I was ready. I kept the lights off, sat on the couch with my phone camera pointed down the hallway, recording video. I didn't look directly at it, just watched through the screen, trying to stay calm. I caught something. A blur. A shape. It was there. But when I reviewed the footage? Just static. Not digital distortion either. Analog static, like what you'd get from an old VHS tape left too close to a magnet. My phone doesn't even have a filter like that. I sat there, heart pounding, watching it loop over and over. White noise, gray fuzz, and that faint, awful feeling that something was under the distortion. A shape trying to push through. I started leaving the hallway light on overnight. I didn't care about the electric bill anymore. The dark felt too alive. But that night, I woke up to a soft click. The hallway light had turned off. By itself. And in the doorway, this time not at the edge, but closer, halfway into the hall, I saw it again. It had my brother's face. But it was smiling. And my brother never smiled like that. I didn't scream. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I froze in bed, clutching the blanket like that would somehow protect me. The figure stood halfway down the hallway now, just past the threshold. No more shadows to hide in, just that grinning face. But it wasn't a real smile. It was too wide. Lips pulled just a bit too far. The teeth were almost right, but they caught the faintest glint of light like they were wet, as if the thing had just been smiling for a little too long. Smiling until it hurt. And the eyes. They weren't my brother's. I don't mean metaphorically, I mean literally. My brother had warm, tired eyes. This thing's eyes were pale and glassy, like someone who hadn't blinked in days. They twitched slightly, not in unison, just the left one. Every so often. Like a puppet being corrected mid-performance. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Maybe 5 seconds. Maybe 10 minutes. Time felt jammed. Then, without warning, it stepped backward. Not turned. Not faded. It took one, single, smooth step back into the darkness of the hallway and vanished. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay there, all the lights on, every muscle tense like something might grab me if I relaxed. I kept whispering to myself. It's a hallucination. You're grieving again. You're not okay. You need help. But it didn't feel like grief. It felt deliberate. Like something had found a face I'd forgotten how to miss, and put it on. The next morning, I made an appointment with a therapist. First opening was in 5 days. I almost begged them to take me sooner, but I didn't want to sound unstable. I needed to hold it together. Until then, I decided I'd sleep with the bedroom door closed. That night I shut it tight. Locked it. But at 3:11 a.m., I woke up to 3 soft knocks. Right on the other side of the door. The knocks weren't loud. They were soft, almost polite. Like someone trying not to wake a child in the next room. Just 3 of them, evenly spaced. Knock. 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 I lay there, eyes open in the dark, watching the faint rectangle of light from the hallway leak in under the door. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it, and I swear I didn't move a single muscle for 10 full minutes. Nothing followed the knocks. No footsteps. No whispers. Just that horrible silence that somehow felt like it was listening. Eventually, I slid out of bed. Quietly. The floor was cold. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the closet, not that I thought it would help, but I needed something. I approached the door slowly, bat raised. My own breath sounded too loud in that stillness. Then I did something stupid. I got low. I crouched down and pressed my eye to the gap under the door. And I saw it. 2 feet. Bare. Pale. Standing motionless in the hallway, toes pointed straight toward the door. Not a muscle moved. No swaying. No breathing. Just standing there, as if it had all the time in the world. And then, just as I leaned back in horror, a voice came through the door. Soft. Calm. So close I could almost feel the breath. Why did you lock it? It was my brother's voice. But it was wrong. Not just in tone or cadence, it was hollow. Like it was being spoken from inside a well. Like someone trying to remember how human speech worked. I stumbled back and sat against the far wall, bat across my lap, not trusting myself to blink. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, eyes locked on that door. Eventually, the feet vanished. Just gone. Like they'd never been there. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But on the door itself, at about chest height, were 3 smudges. Faint. Greasy. Like fingerprints. Or maybe palm prints. After that night, I started keeping notes. I filled pages with times, descriptions, what the figure looked like, where it stood, what it did. Part of me hoped I'd spot a pattern, find some thread of logic I could pull that would unravel the whole thing. But the more I wrote down, the worse it looked. It wasn't random. It wasn't a dream. It was practicing. Each time the figure appeared, it looked a little more like someone I'd known. Not just my brother anymore. It began blending features from other people, an old roommate, a girl I dated briefly in college, my dad. Always just enough detail to make me feel like I should recognize it. Like it was trying to become someone I trusted. But it always got something wrong. One eye slightly off. Ears too low. Voice too clipped, like it was reading lines from a script it didn't fully understand. That's what chilled me the most, it was rehearsing. I started testing it. Leaving my phone recording again. Keeping notes on when the lights flickered, when the knocks came, how long it stayed. But every time I tried to catch it, the footage would glitch or go blank. No sound. No visuals. And yet, every night around 3 a.m., I'd wake up. No alarm, no sound. Just a feeling that something was there. One night I didn't get out of bed. I just stayed perfectly still, facing the wall, pretending to sleep. I kept my breathing slow and steady. And from behind me, inside the room this time, I heard quiet footsteps on the floor. Not creeping. Not tiptoeing. Just calm, deliberate steps. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But I listened. It moved slowly across the floor, and stopped right behind my head. Close enough that if I'd reached back, I could have touched it. It didn't say anything. It just breathed. Slow. Wet. Shallow. And then, after maybe a minute, it began whispering. Not words. Not language. Just nonsense. Like a recording played backward. Garbled. Twitchy. Except, underneath the static, I swear I heard it practicing my name. Getting the rhythm of it right. When the day of my therapy appointment finally came, I almost didn't go. Not because I didn't want help. I desperately did. But I was afraid that if I left the apartment, something would change. That maybe the figure was somehow tied to the place, and walking away from it would mean losing control over what little I understood. Still I went. I sat in that little room with the white noise machine humming in the corner, and tried to explain what was happening without sounding insane. I told her I'd been having vivid hallucinations. That I was struggling with insomnia. That I'd been seeing things in the dark, figures from my past. That they were distorted. I said I'd found a footprint. That I'd heard things that weren't real. She nodded. Took notes. Asked about my stress levels, caffeine intake, family history. All the usual boxes. She asked if I ever felt like these figures were trying to communicate. I hesitated, then said, yes. Sort of. They change. They imitate. That's when her expression flickered. Just for a second. Like something passed through her, a thought she didn't want to share. She recovered quickly, kept writing, but I saw it. Before I left, she gave me the number of a sleep clinic. Suggested I keep a dream journal. Told me that sleep paralysis could do remarkable things to the mind. But here's the thing. I didn't tell her about the whispering. About the way it stood in the room, behind me. About how it had started getting closer each night. I didn't mention the growing certainty that this wasn't a product of stress or guilt. Because I saw that flicker in her eyes. And I had the awful feeling she'd heard this before. I went home feeling worse than when I left. More exposed. More watched. And that night? The figure was waiting for me again. Only this time, it wasn't in the hallway. It was sitting at my kitchen table. Right where I had been just a few hours earlier, drinking coffee and wondering if I was losing my mind. And as I stepped into the doorway, it looked up from the table with my mother's face. Except her eyes were gone. Just smooth, dark skin stretched over where they should have been. And she smiled. I didn't move. I couldn't. That thing sat at my table like it belonged there, posture perfect, hands folded neatly, like it was waiting for me to join it for breakfast. The smile never dropped, just stayed plastered on that eyeless version of my mother's face. But I knew it wasn't her. Couldn't be. My mom died when I was 19, and even at her worst, hooked up to tubes and slipping in and out of herself, she never looked like this. This wasn't a memory. It was an approximation. It looked like someone had built her face out of wax and stretched it too tight, then forgotten to include the parts that made her human. The tiny wrinkles at the corners of her mouth. The freckle above her eyebrow. Her eyes. I backed away slowly, hands trembling, heart pounding so hard I thought I might black out. I didn't take my eyes off the thing, not even when I reached the hallway. Not even when I grabbed the door handle and slammed the bedroom door shut. I locked it. Then I shoved a dresser in front of it. And sat in the corner with the bat across my lap and a single lamp burning overhead. I didn't sleep. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard the chair in the kitchen scrape across the floor. Then footsteps. Slow. Even. It walked the length of the hallway once. Twice. Then stopped directly on the other side of my door. No knock this time. Just breathing. Hours later, when the sun came up and everything felt almost normal again, I opened the door. The apartment was empty. But the chair had been moved to face the hallway. Like it had been watching the door. Like it knew I was behind it. After that night, something broke in me. I didn't leave the apartment for 2 days. Called in sick again. Didn't answer texts. I even unplugged the TV and turned my phone off. I couldn't stand reflections. Couldn't stand the feeling that anything else was watching me through a screen. I started covering the mirrors too. It wasn't paranoia, not really. It was instinct. Like an animal that senses a storm long before it hits. I felt like if I caught even a glimpse of the thing through glass or reflection, it might get closer. Might somehow learn more. I didn't know how that worked, I just knew. And the figure, it knew I was afraid. It started showing up earlier. Midnight. 11:30. Sometimes I'd glance up from my laptop and catch the shape of it standing behind the couch, still and quiet, just waiting. Always different. One night, it had the face of my high school best friend, except with a mouth that opened too wide and never closed. Another time, it wore my own face. That one almost broke me. I walked into the hallway, half asleep, and there it was, same posture, same hoodie, same bedhead hair, just watching me. Like a version of myself peeled out of a memory and stretched thin. The way it tilted its head, the way it mimicked the expression I wore seconds before. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror that had learned how to lie. That was the first time I shouted. I screamed at it. "What do you want?" And for once, it moved. Not toward me. Just turned its head slowly, like an animal registering sound. And in a voice that didn't sound like mine, or anyone I'd ever known, it said, "You forgot me." Then it disappeared, just blinked out, like a glitch in reality. That was the first night I seriously considered leaving. Just grabbing my keys and walking out. Sleeping in the car, a hotel, anywhere else. But the moment I reached the front door, hand on the knob, I felt something cold slip through me. Not a breeze. Not fear. A warning. Like whatever this was, it wanted me to leave. And something deep down whispered, "If you leave, it'll follow." I stopped turning the lights off at night. Every bulb in the apartment burned from dusk to dawn. The hum of electricity became a kind of comfort, a wall of sound that helped me pretend the dark wasn't just outside the frame. I didn't sleep much, maybe a few minutes at a time. When I did, I'd wake up with the feeling that I'd been watched the entire time. One night, I jolted awake with the image of a hand reaching out from under my bed burned into my mind. Just a hand, pale, long-fingered, twitching slightly like it wasn't sure how fingers were supposed to move. It wasn't there when I looked. But the bed frame was warm to the touch. Too warm. That's when I noticed something new. The figure had stopped appearing in just one place. It had expanded. I saw it standing near the shower curtain one morning, just behind the frosted plastic. Another time, I caught it in the corner of the mirror above the kitchen sink, even though I'd covered the mirrors days before. The sheet had fallen. But worst of all, what really shattered any doubt that this was in my head, was the smell. It started faint. Like wet soil. Like something old and buried had been brought into the apartment. It clung to the hallway first, then the kitchen, and finally to me. No matter how many showers I took, how many windows I opened, it stayed. It smelled like a grave. That night, I sat on my bed, lamp on, staring at the open bedroom door. I don't know why I left it open. I think I was daring it. Daring whatever this was to show itself again. To make it clear. I was exhausted, numb. I didn't care anymore. And it stepped into view. But this time, it didn't stop at the hallway. It entered the room. The light didn't stop it. The walls didn't protect me. It moved slowly, one foot in front of the other, just like a person would. But it wasn't a person. Not really. Its face was, all of them. My brother. My mother. My old friend. Me. It shimmered like a reflection on broken water, constantly shifting, constantly correcting. It stood at the edge of my bed. And then, in a dozen overlapping voices, some too deep, some too shrill, it said, "You let me in." I couldn't move. I didn't scream this time. I didn't reach for the bat. I didn't even flinch. My body had completely locked up, like it knew that doing anything, even breathing too loud, might tip things into something far worse. The figure stood no more than 3 feet from me. I could see it clearly now, under the warm bulb of the bedside lamp. And it wasn't just a blending of faces anymore. It was unfinished. Like someone had started building a human but ran out of time, or interest. Its skin was too smooth in some places, like plastic, and too wrinkled in others. The eyes didn't blink together. The lips moved like they were remembering how. And the voices, they didn't echo in the room. They echoed in me. Each syllable vibrated deep in my chest, like they were using my own bones to speak. "You remembered the wrong way. You left pieces behind. We found them." My mind felt like it was splitting down the middle. I wasn't sure if I was awake anymore. I looked into its face and saw flashes, fractured memories I hadn't thought about in years. A hospital room. The smell of antiseptic and flowers gone bad. A voicemail I never returned. A locked drawer with photos I never looked at again. It had dug through all of it. Not just people I'd lost, but the way I lost them. And it was wearing my shame like a second skin. And then, slowly, so slowly it made my breath hitch, it knelt beside the bed. Its head tilted sideways, twitching slightly. It brought its mouth near my ear, and in a voice that almost sounded like my own, it whispered, "You invited me when you forgot them." That broke me. I lunged, somehow, shoving the thing back hard enough that it hit the wall and crumpled like a marionette with its strings cut. I didn't wait to see if it moved again. I ran. Out the door. Down the hall. 3 flights of stairs barefoot. Into the night. I didn't stop until I hit the street. Cold air hit my lungs like a punch and I collapsed on the sidewalk, sobbing like a child. I stayed in a hotel that night. Lights on. TV blaring. And I didn't sleep. But I kept thinking about what it said. You invited me. I didn't go back for 2 days. I stayed in that hotel room, eating vending machine snacks and half watching old sitcom reruns with the volume too loud. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, or faces. I kept replaying those words in my head. You invited me when you forgot them. What did that mean? By the second night, something changed. Not outside, but inside. The fear didn't go away, but it was joined by something colder. A thought I'd been trying not to have. What if it wasn't trying to hurt me? What if it just wanted me to remember? I started digging. Opened my old laptop. Pulled up ancient photo folders. Checked my phone's cloud backup. Started sorting through a decade of things I'd buried. Friends I hadn't spoken to. Family I never called. People I'd drifted from, ghosted, or abandoned after funerals I barely attended. And I saw it. In the gaps. My brother's last voicemail. Never listened to. Deleted. A photo of my mom from the hospital. The last one. I'd cropped myself out of it. An old message from my friend Darren, dated 3 days before his accident. Hey, you free this weekend? I never replied. The thing wasn't random. It wasn't evil, not exactly. It was everything I'd ignored. Everything I'd tried not to carry. And somehow, those forgotten fragments had formed something. Something that didn't want revenge. It wanted recognition. When I returned to the apartment, it felt colder. Not in temperature, just in tone. Like walking into a house after everyone's left, and the echo of conversations still lingers. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted to see it again. And I did. It was already there, sitting at the kitchen table again, motionless. Its shape had settled. No longer shifting. It didn't try to wear my brother's face, or my mother's. It didn't try to be anyone else. It looked like a person I'd never met, but somehow knew. Familiar, not because it was someone I'd known, but because it was made from them. A composite. A monument. It looked at me without moving. And I said quietly, I remember you now. Its head tilted, just slightly. The skin around its face loosened. The smile disappeared. Then, slowly, it stood. Walked past me. And vanished into the hallway. It never came back after that. But I still leave the hallway light on sometimes. Not because I'm afraid. But because I know there are pieces of me, of all of us, that wait in the dark, hoping to be seen again.